Now, if at the end of the day JSON just doesn't do much for you, well, I really wouldn't blame you. It seems very plain and uninteresting, but I'll tell you there is real power in being able to convert data that is stored in memory into something that you can send to another place and then turn right back into that data. It's not a trivial act, and while JSON itself as a notation is very simplistic, where it really becomes powerful is in that sending, and that's what AJAX does. Now, AJAX sounds like this scary new technology or some new language we're going to learn. No, it's just a couple simple functions that are available inside of the JavaScript browser environment. And really when they become powerful is where they're stacked on top of lots of other components to make a full sort of asynchronous system. But even without that in place, we can do some basic things with it and get some pretty cool results. So let's talk a little bit about the basics. All you're going to do with AJAX is you're going to create and send a request. So you do that through this thing called the XML HTTP request object, or XHR, for its initials. This is just a JavaScript object. You make a new version of it just like you would make any other predefined object. And we'll see all of that in just a moment. You set all of its parameters, or at least some of them. There are a few basic parameters you need to set with it, and you set those either by calling functions or by setting them directly. Then you need to set a function that will run when the response is received. The response will eventually show up at a later time, and that will be an event. And just like any other event, like click or blur or any of these other events we've been dealing with, we'll be able to provide a function that will run when that event happens, when the response is received. Then all you have to do is send the request. The rest all happens automatically. When the response is available, we'll be able to trigger that event and do something with the data that we've received back. So the page will continue like normal after you send it. No waiting occurs. No data has been received yet, but you can continue to interact with it, and your user is none the wiser that anything's really going on. Usually you do want to inform them that something's on its way. You can show them that in some way. We're not going to get into those sorts of details, though. What we would do at that point is wait for the response. This will trigger an event. So let's talk about the XHR in a little more detail, the XML HTTP request object. So you would declare this just like an object, and then there's a few basic functions we have to call. The first one is open. We call open with some very specific parameters that allows us to set a few key things. The URL that we're going to actually access, because we always use a URL when we're accessing something on a server. So this tells it what server to go to, what specific sort of endpoint we're going to send our request to. Maybe it's an actual page, maybe it's some sort of JSON file. Most of the time nowadays, you're using that URL to tell the server exactly what kind of data you want. The server then computes that data and will send it back to you in its response. The other thing you need to set is onReadyStateChange. It's a very poorly named function, but this is what actually will run when the response is received. Now it will run several times. Anytime the actual state of the response changes, this function will run. So we also have to check and make sure that the data has been fully received and we're ready to respond to it. But we'll get into all of that when you see us setting this. We're going to set this equal to a function, just like we've done with other basic event responders in JavaScript. Lastly, you call the function send, and that starts everything in motion. But send will immediately return, and when it does, you can go on and do other things. The page remains responsive, and it isn't until we actually get the response back that the code we put inside of onReadyStateChange will run. I've said that like 10 different times now, but you probably get it. So let's go do some of this. It's really not that complicated. AJAX is much more conceptually difficult to understand than it is to actually program. It is a little bit verbose in the programming, but as you might guess, jQuery is going to help with that. So I've created another little example here. This is just a slight modification of what we did with JSON. We have inside of this our typical index.html. The only thing we're linking in is index.js. We also have an empty index.js for now, which is where we're going to start doing our AJAX business. And then I have people.json. This is only slightly different from what we had at the end of the last example. What I did was I decided to take what was created by json.stringify and put it in here. And the key difference is it has no white space at all. And that's really how JSON should be. JSON is meant for computer consumption, not human consumption. So white space in there is just wasted bits. We might as well leave it out. So I'm going with that here for this one. You should be able to get that from the course website. Let's go ahead and set up a few things on this page. This is going to be one of those cases where I want to take this data and present it as a table, of course. That's what we usually do with this kind of stuff. So let's make a table. We'll give it the usual bootstrap classes, table and table striped, because I can't get enough of the stripes. And then I'm not going to bother to put in the t-head or the t-body. We'll be able to create all those using jQuery very easily. So we're giving us a place to actually insert this data once we have it, but we don't have it yet. At the start of this particular page, when it gets rendered, nothing's available. So we're just going to leave it blank until we have something to put in there. The other thing we need to do is we need to sort of initiate the data transfer. And for that, there's nothing like just having a good old button. So I'm going to make a button, type equals button, not terribly exciting. We'll give it an ID, we'll call it getData button. And we'll have it say getData. Let's give it some classes so that Bootstrap knows to make it pretty. btn is the base one, and let's say btn dash primary. And so there we go, we got our little blue button here. Doesn't do anything yet because we haven't assigned anything to its event, but we'll do that. So this allows us to initiate the AJAX data transfer when we click this button. Everything else is going to happen over on the JavaScript side of things, so let's move over to there. As we've done before, or recently in the last unit, with jQuery, we're going to want to do the whole document.ready sort of function here. So remember, this allows us to specify a function that will run when the DOM is fully loaded and when we can count on all of its components being available. So it's always good to put any global code that you have inside of there rather than just sitting at the global level. Here, within this, I want to do a few things. First things first, let's go ahead and make something happen when we click that button. So we'll retrieve the button itself using its ID, the getData button, and we'll say .click, because that's how we can specify a click event using jQuery. And then let's make that function. This always starts to look a little odd here. We're inside a function that's defining a function, and inside that we're defining another function. So, get used to looking at things like that. It's kind of the nature of JavaScript and the nature of jQuery. So this now is the function that's going to run when we click this button. What's it going to do? For now, you know what? One thing we can do here actually to make life just a little bit easier is let's make this a function. We'll call it retrieve data. And then let's declare that elsewhere. So there we go. Now we don't have quite functions inside functions inside functions here. We declare it down here and we just mention it up here. So retrieve data. For now, let's just do console.log button clicked. Just to confirm that we have what we need. Here, I'll do console.info so it doesn't yell at me. And let's bring up that console. So we always do it in little steps like this. I know you're probably saying, of course it's going to work, because you know it will, right? But let's always test. And there we go. You can see. When it's multiple things, it just counts them up like that. But you can see. That seems to be working, so no typos in there yet. All right, so now what do we want to do? Well, we want to, as it says, retrieve the data. To work on this from here, I'm going to want to be working from example. Naturally, most of the examples I recommend using, and the one I'm going to recommend using today, come from the W3 schools. So let's go ahead and visit some of the AJAX pages for the W3 schools. I'll have links to these also available for you. You can basically find them by doing Google search for W3 schools AJAX, and eventually you'll wind up over here in the JavaScript section where it says JavaScript AJAX. And there's lots of useful things in here that you might want to look through. But for us, we're going to do the basic open and send of this. Let me actually back up just one notch here because we need to make the request first. So let's do it like this. We'll declare the actual request. It's a new XML HTTP request. And this is just like we declare objects in other languages, and we did a little bit of this when we were talking about objects back when we first started learning JavaScript. This is a built-in object that's available to us anytime we're inside a browser. And I'm going to actually call this XHR. It's a little more typical to call it that, because remember, it's an XML HTTP request, XHR. So that is us declaring it. The next thing we need to do is tell it where to go. So this is when we're going to do the open function. So the open function takes a few different things that we need to make sure we declare. First, it takes a URL, and that URL can be relative to the current page we're on. In our case, we can just say people.json. Because it's relative to where we are. Oh, excuse me, that's not the first thing, that's the second thing. The first thing is the actual method we're going to use. For our purposes, we're going to say get. There are really two methods that we ever get into in this class. HTTP defines several different methods that you can use, but there are only really two we're going to get into this class. There's get and there's post. We'll get into post in Unit 3. For now, we're going to stick with get pretty much everywhere. The last variable is whether or not you want this to actually be asynchronous. You could make it synchronous if you want, and that means when you call send, send will wait and will not return until you've actually received the result. That's kind of boring. That's not really what we want to do. So let's do asynchronous. That's really what we want. So we'll pretty much always be saying true there. So now we've configured it. We've told it you're going to go to the URL people.json, which is relative to the current file. Then we're going to use the get protocol to get it, and we're going to do it asynchronously. Because we're doing it asynchronously, we must set a function that will respond to it. And that function gets set on a very specific property here that we already mentioned. Let's see if we can get down to the properties. There it is. On ready state change. So I'm going to keep this up right here. This is actually going to be really important. XML HTTP request object properties, because we're going to be mostly working with those from here on out. So let's take our XHR object and set its on ready set change. This is a parameter, a property. So we just directly set it, and we're going to set it to a function. What is this function going to do? So this function is going to get called anytime the ready state changes. And so we're going to want to look at two different things. So first of all, the ready state needs to be equal to 4. Request finished and response is ready. If it equals anything else, that means we have not finished the process. So we're going to want to test that. We say if xhr dot ready state equals 4. If it equals 4, then we're ready to move on in. And this is where you really need to keep this handy so you know what these are. 0, 1, 2, and 3, those are all in-between states. It could be useful to know about these and to do something with them, especially if things are going wrong. But for us, we only care about 4. The other thing we need to know is, was the response what we were looking for? And that's going to come from this other one, status. So we would say if xhr.status equals, and the OK status, the one we want to get, is 200. Now what are these status values? You've actually run into these before these are the status that is stored inside the HTTP response header. And there's some very famous ones. The one everybody hates is 404, not found. That means the thing you asked the server for could not be found. And lots of pages will throw out different things to you when they return a 404. There's lots of different ones that could be in here. Responses that start with 500 and all the different 500 values, those mean that some sort of error occurred on the server. That's an error state. Responses that start with 200 mean they're all good. And you can look up these responses. One from over here, you can see what they all are. 100 is different information. 200 is successful in some way. 300 is redirection. I'm moving you to another page. 400 is some sort of error, and 404 is the one you often see. 403 is not unusual either. And then 500, a 500 error is not all that untypical either. 502 does show up from time to time. These are the main ones that you can run into, and these are all defined by the powers that be. These are all universal error codes, basically. We want to see 200, because that means everything is A-OK. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to say console.log, or let's see, .info, we'd rather do. And we will put out there response received. And then let's actually put the text of the response right in here. A response really is just text. It's just a file. And we can have it right here, response text. We say xhr.response text. So there we go. So we've got everything set up. We've set up exactly where we want it to go, how we're gonna communicate, and the fact that we want to do it asynchronously. And then we've given it, this is the function we want it to run when everything's ready. You always have to do these first two lines to sort of check that we're at ready state 4 and that the status is 200. The last thing we do is to start the communication by saying xhr.send. This says go ahead and start doing your thing. And so this all gets launched in the background. Because we said asynchronous, it's going to continue in the background. We don't wait to receive the response. Instead, when the response comes, this will just simply run the function we gave it, just like we told it to. All right, let's see if we have any errors in here. We very well might. Nothing has been triggered yet. Okay, let's click our button. Fingers crossed. There it is. So we just received data, and we received it asynchronously. And you can see here, what is it? It's our JSON file, exactly what we were looking for, people.json. Now you might remember from the last example, if we visit that directly, we get it, but it just downloads it. Oops, no, that's the wrong one. Let's put, okay, there we go. People.json, it just downloads it. Now, that's not what we want it to do. Here now, when we go to get data, we receive it as a string, and each time we run this, it'll keep responding with that. All right, so there we go. We've got the data. Right now we're just dumping it to the console. That's not much fun, but the data is the most important thing. So what do we do with this? Let's build a table, because that's what we always do. We already set up our HTML for that, and we'll use jQuery to try and make it as painless as possible. So we'll go through here now. I'm going to make a function, rebuild table, and have it receive the data. So making this function now, this isn't going to be any like AJAX kind of stuff. It's just a review of jQuery and of some JavaScript stuff. But we can go through this pretty quick. So first things first, let's clear any old data. We don't want it to come in looking, or we don't want to compound upon the data we've already received. So we can do that really quick and easy by simply grabbing the table, which I don't think we gave an ID to. That was silly. Yeah, we didn't. Let's give it an ID. Let's call it data table, because why not? So now, back over here, we can pull that out, hashtag data table, that gets it, .empty. And so that deletes any children tags that are still there on data table. Now, let's make the header. So we will say var table head equals, and then we'll go ahead and make a t head the usual way using jQuery here, and then var table, or we'll call it header row, is going to equal, and we'll make a new tr. Now we just need to go through and set up all the different columns we're going to need. Now this time we don't have that slick column names array. We could make it, I suppose, if we wanted to, but let's not give ourselves anything that we wouldn't normally have. So we're just going to have to do this manually. We know we've got ID, first name, last name, email, and created. So let's just put them all in there. So we can say header row dot append. And then let's go ahead and make ourselves a th and give it HTML, or actually it's just text, equal to one of those things. So the first one is going to be ID. So we've appended the very first piece of data there. And let's keep going. The next one will be first name. At this point, it's just a little bit of tedious work to get all these typed in. Last name, email is in here, so email. And finally, the last thing in there is always going to be created. We can't use a loop or anything here because these are just each their own little custom tags. Now, finally, we need to put that row into the head. So we say table head dot append header row, and then we say hashtag data table dot append table head. So there we go, we've made our header. In fact, I'm going to take this down here. We don't really need it until we get all the way down here. So we make a new head, append the row, and put it into there. So here we're going to make the header row, and then put header row into thead and table. That's what we're doing. And now we're going to go through and do something very similar for building all the actual data rows. So what we need to do here, this time we're going to need to make the t-body right away because we're going to be adding a bunch of rows to it, not just one. So table body is going to be a t-body. And then we need to loop through all of the different objects that are inside of our data. So we assume what we've gotten here is the actual data that we need to work with. Not a JSON string, but the actual data. We just assume it's come through correctly, and we'll connect all the pieces here in just a moment where it is actually the data. And so we would want to just say data.forEach, or it's an array, and we can just go through for each and receive with each one there a person. And then we're going to need to go through and do something like this again, where we're going to make a new row and add the actual data into it. So this is going to be a body row, and then we're going to go through and add all of the individual bits and pieces here. And we don't want to add them as THs this time, they need to be TDs because they're just regular cells. And then this text here is all going to come from person.id. And then we've got person.firstname, we've got person.last name, we've got person.email, and finally person.created. And that's all of our data. And then we need to put that row into the actual body. Table body.append body row. And there we go. Lastly, let's put that into the actual table. So data table dot append table body. And we have built ourselves a data table. There may very well be some errors in here. Maybe you already spotted them as I was typing this, but in order to actually test this, we've just got to keep going. So what do? We're going to want to call rebuild table as soon as we have some data to feed it. And that's right here. Here's where we're ready for that. What we can do here now is instead of logging this to the console, let's actually retrieve that data. So we'll say people data equals, and now is when we want to use that JSON.parse, because it's a JSON string that we received back. It's up to us now to actually parse that out. What do? We say xhr.response text. That's where the JSON data was located. So assuming it's well formed and everything goes well, we'll now have the actual object right here in people data. We just call rebuild table, people data. All right, A lot of bits and pieces there. Did it all come together correctly? Let's see. Hey, there it is. There is the magic of AJAX. When we go through and do this, it will grab that data. And that data is not there until we actually click the button. So, this might not feel too impressive. You have to really appreciate that this is a building block to build much bigger things, to build things like Google Docs or Facebook or these really massive projects. It's in how you use it that you really can go somewhere with this. We'll start getting into that a little bit once we get to the very end of Unit 3. For now, we just want to understand the basics of it, and that's all we're getting at. Let me show you one way we can explore this a little further. I'm going to expand out this web page by itself here, and I want to show you one of the tools that's available here in the developer tools that allows you to really see what's going on. So let's refresh this page, get back to scratch, and let's look at right now sources. You can see exactly what we have. We have index, which is our HTML file, and we have index.js, which is our JavaScript file. Those have been served to it. Everything is just hunky-dory there. There's nothing in particular going on with them yet. Until I click Get Data, it has not gotten that JSON. Once I click Get Data, that's when it shows up. It doesn't really even get listed over here anywhere in particular. But we did actually at that point send out a request and we received a response back. There are some browsers which will show up as a new sort of response, but Chrome doesn't do that. Every single browser will also have a tab that looks like this, Network. And the network will sort of show you what's going on. Now I will warn you, you're going to see a lot of extra things going on here because we're using Browser Sync, and Browser Sync does a whole bunch of funky stuff to make things actually happen. But let's just sort of refresh this page. And you can see here we got jQuery, Bootstrap, Font Awesome, and then here's index.js, and then it did a few other things, and localhost, which was our main file here. I'm going to go ahead and clear this, and so we can then watch all the activity that happens after the fact. Now when we say get data, you can see it goes out and requests people.json. It says it's an XHR request. It even shows you how long it took to get it before it came back and what the status was. So you can examine very closely the data itself here. Notice any headers that were in that response, because HTTP always has that stuff buried in there, and also what you sent to it in the request headers as well as the response, and lots of other things. Here's the real detailed response that came back from it, just all that raw JSON data. So this can be a really nice way to examine things, this network tab, when you're doing anything that involves AJAX. And keep in mind here too, as all of this happens, you can see exactly what they are. So here's our basic process here as it went through. You can get really detailed timing information as well here too. If you're trying to optimize a web page or a server and make certain that you can see where the bottleneck is, this can be a great way to figure it out.